Hey everyone, Tactics here with my 8th and final Season 1 Mythic Plus Guide for Dragonflight, finally going through the fan favorite dungeon that's being brought back, Court of Stars. In this video, I'll walk you guys through everything you need to know about this revamped Legion dungeon, including the profession, race, and class buffs, important interrupts, and other trash abilities, boss mechanics, and I'll even show off a simple, easy to execute thundering route that'll be great for pugging early on in the season. If you want to see similar guide videos for any of the other Season 1 dungeons, those are all over on my channel, and I'll link them down in the description below as well if you're interested. Throughout this season, I'll also be posting a ton of useful Mythic Plus and Raid related content, such as advanced routing guides, high-key walkthroughs from a tank's perspective, and even tank tips for normal, heroic, and mythic raid bosses. So if any of that sounds like something you'd want to see, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. With that said, let's start off by talking about some of the different buffs littered around this dungeon, and there are quite a few. Essentially, throughout the dungeon, buff items will spawn in certain locations that you can interact with if you have the correct class, race, or profession, and these will give a variety of different buffs. This includes flat 10% haste, summoning an emissary away from the second boss, and even auto-killing the first boss once he reaches 25% HP. I'll post the list of all these potential buffs down below. Unfortunately, which of these items spawns is randomly chosen each run, so you may not always have the same buffs available, but they will always be in the same spots if they do spawn. Luckily, I do have a handy map that shows the position of all of these buffs, as well as what can use them, which I'll also post in the description for you guys to see. Note that at the moment, I'm not sure if Dracthyr or Evokers have something they can interact with as well, but I'll post a comment if that changes. For this map, the blue dots show all the different stat buffs, whereas the red dots show the buffs that interact with trash or boss mobs. Notably, two of the more powerful item spawns in the Goblin Gnome and Engineering Orb, as well as the Blacksmithing and Hunter Trap, both received significant nerfs to their performance in order to bring them in line with the other buffs. The orbs no longer fully disable Guardian constructs, which we'll talk about later. Instead, they cause them to deal 25% less damage and be stunned for 5 seconds every 20 seconds. Similarly, the trap no longer instantly kills one of the second boss emissaries. Now it deals 10% of their HP and damage and causes them to take 25% increased damage for 30 seconds. Outside of that, all of the other buffs remain the same. Now that we've talked about profession buffs, let's talk a bit about the trash leading up to the first boss, starting off with the Dusk Watch guards. These guys have a frontal cone at the tank in Quelling Strike. This does not follow the tank, so they can avoid it as well, and they will want to because this will stun anyone hit. They also have the Cast Fortification. This is a 25% DR and haste magic buff, so you can interrupt this, or you can purge / spell steal this if you have a mage in your group, for example, for that nice buff. Duskwatch sentries are also all around this area. They will immediately throw torch to the first person that aggroes them, and this is a pretty nasty fire hit and dot, so you want to make sure that your tank is the person that aggroes these mobs. If someone else accidentally butt pulls one of these sentries, they are in for a very bad time. Immediately upon being aggroed, they are try and run to the nearest watch post, which are these pillars that you can interact with throughout this area towards the first boss, and once they get to them, they will try and cast Sound Alarm, which is interruptible and stoppable, and if it's successful, it will summon a Duskwatch reinforcement. These reinforcements just have one interruptible ability in Subdue, which is a random target magic stun for 8 seconds, so you will want to make sure you interrupt this. You can also dispel it as it is a magic effect. You will want to interact with these watch posts on your way to the first boss, because the first boss does have an ability that interacts with any of these watch posts that you do not deactivate, so make sure you go towards all of these and interact with them to disable them. Mana Saber Cats are also in this area, and they just have one spell in Mana Bang. This is a jump attack at a random ranged target that hits in a 5-yard radius around where they land, and apply a magic dot as well, so make sure you are a little spread when engaging these guys. The Squatch Arcanists are caster mobs in this area, and they have two interruptible abilities. One is Nightfall Orb. This is a random target arcane hit that bounces to up to 3 nearby allies, and this hits pretty hard as well, so you want to make sure you interrupt this. It is not stoppable, unfortunately, so you have to commit a kick. They also have Seal Magic, again interruptible, and this is just a 10-yard AoE silence that you will want to run out of. Bound Energy are often alongside these Arcanists, and they just have Charged Blast. This ability is a big frontal line attack at the tank that does not follow them, so you can avoid it, of course, and also knock back anyone hit. This ability is stoppable though, so you will want to make sure you try and do this, or at the very least just make sure it's not pointing towards the rest of your party, because this does chunk. The last smaller mob in this area are mana worms, and these guys just have wild detonation, so on death they'll leave a 5-yard swirly on the ground that you just want to make sure you're not standing in. In terms of bigger mobs in this area, there's the Guardian Construct, which I mentioned earlier on in the video. These guys have a couple important spells you'll want to interrupt. Charging Station is the first one, and this will do a 5% heal and 2% damage done increase to all allies within 20 yards of the Guardian Construct. So this doesn't really do anything if it's just the Guardian Construct alone, but if anything else is nearby, they'll get a ton of healing and some damage increased as well. So you want to make sure you kick this. They also have Suppress, which is a random target channel attack that is ticking damage and pacifies the player that it's targeting. This is a magic ability, so it can actually be dispelled off of them, but you also can just commit a kick to this as well. Finally, they have a tank frontal attack in Charge Smash. This puts a little 4-yard puddle on the tank here, and it does follow where the tank is, so be careful of that. Don't be stacked on top of your tank when you're fighting these guys. The other big mob in this area is the Arcane Manifestation, and these guys just have a single cast in Drain Magic, another interruptible one, and this is a 50-yard party hit that gives a 5% damage done increase to the manifestation if it goes off. This can be purged off of them as it is a magic buff, but ideally you just make sure you keep these guys kicked. Patrolling around the large room you get to here is the first boss, Patrol Captain Gerdo. He has a ton of dodgeable abilities for you to deal with. First is Resonant Slash, similar to the frontal from the guard mobs earlier in the dungeon, except this creates a cone both in front and behind the boss that you'll want to avoid. Street Sweepers also occasionally spawn, and this just shoots a line of arcane energy at a random player that you'll want to get out of. To make dodging both of these abilities a little bit more difficult, Gerdo will sometimes cast Arcane Lockdown, which puts 3 stacks of a dot and a 30% slow on every player in the party. This is a magic debuff, so you can dispel it, but you can also just get rid of these stacks by jumping. So as soon as this goes out, you want to immediately jump 3 times, both to get rid of that slow so you can dodge, and also reduce the damage you take from that dot. On top of this, if you've left any of the watch posts on the way to this boss active, when Signal Beacon is cast, each of them that is left active will spawn a Vigilant Dusk Watch, an ad that will just try and spam cast Hinder, very similar to that Reinforcement ad, just a random target stun that you want to interrupt and stop from going off. Once the boss reaches 25% HP, he'll run to the center of the room and drink from his Flask of Solemn Night, increasing his haste and damage by 30%. However, if you have a rogue or an alchemist in your party, you can interact with this flask at any time, and instead it will just instantly kill the boss at this point. This saves you a pretty decent chunk of time, especially on tyrannical keys, and is definitely something you want to have in your group. From there, you'll make your way through the nearby building, and you'll have a bunch of demon ads you'll need to deal with. Versus the Watchful Inquisitor, and these guys have the Searing Glare ability. This is a big fire tank hit, interruptible and stoppable, so do one of those. They also have Eye Storm, and this is a stoppable ability that you will want to make sure that you stop, as it's just channeled ticking party damage, and this is pretty hard hitting as well, especially with some of the nearby Blazing Imps in the discussion. So these guys just have a couple castable abilities. Firebolt, random target fire damage, you can kick this, as well as Drifting Embers. This is just a channeled tick of damage to random players, but it ticks very quickly, every 0.5 seconds here, and very hard as well, so kick or stop this as it is a channel. Some Shadow Mistress ads are also in this area. They also have 2 abilities. Bewitch is the only interruptible ability. This is a random target, 75% slow and haste reduction. This also is a magic debuff, so if you miss that kick, you can dispel it instead. They also have a tank hit that is pure shadow damage in Shadow Slash, so be aware, as it also has a 25% healing reduction. Legion Hounds are also in this area. They have Fellblaze Leap, which is just a random ranged target jump that leaves behind a puddle you want to stay out of, as well as Ferocity, which is an enrage effect that increases their haste by 100%, so you can soothe this. Now in this area, you'll also need to somehow pull away the 3 demonic emissaries away from the second boss here, as each of them has the Bond of Cunning buff, which is a 100% health and damage increase for each demonic emissary that's nearby, which also buffs the boss. In order to bring these guys away from the boss, you'll need to either interact with one of those red dots on the buff map that has spawned this time around. Again, I'll post that up here again for you to check out for yourself. Or if those aren't available, or you don't have the correct thing to use those red dots, instead what you can do is you can kill one of the Fellbound Enforcer mobs that has spawned randomly throughout this area. These are lieutenant mobs. They're very easy to deal with in the fact that they only really have one ability in Fell Detonation, and what this is a big 60-yard party hit that has a nasty 12-second dot attached to it, but luckily this dot can be LOS'd, so the idea here is to bring them to one of the nearby corners or rooms and use the walls here to LOS that very, very long Fell Detonation cast. Everyone in your group should be able to easily LOS this, assuming you bring them relatively close to a wall, and make sure you do that, and these guys become quite easy to defeat. Once defeating a Fellbound Enforcer, it'll automatically call over one of the demonic emissaries, and note that all of these guys have gained an ability since Legion here for Dragonflight. Specifically, they will always come in the same order, so first up is Imakacha, and this guy has Whirling Blades, which is an 8-yard AoE around the boss that will bleed anyone hit, and they also have Scream of Pain, and this is just a 50-yard party hit that will also interrupt anyone casting for 5 seconds. The second emissary is Balgar the Watchful. This guy's got Disintegration Beam, which is a random target channeled shadow hit that also slows and puts a stacking damage reduction on them. You want to interrupt this. And he also has Impending Doom. This is a magic dot that goes onto 2 random targets, and on removal it'll explode within 50 yards. This can be pretty scary, but it is somewhat useful to note that this can also be LOS'd in that the person with the debuff themselves, if they LOS the rest of the party and then their debuff expires, that explosion will not actually hit the rest of the party. So potentially some useful things you can use with that information. The final lieutenant here is Jasharu. This guy's got a tank frontal and shockwave that is avoidable from the tank's perspective as it doesn't follow, and it will stun anyone hit. And he also has Crushing Leap, which is just a random ranged target, jump, and a knockback that you want to avoid. Once you've defeated all 3 emissaries, then you'll be able to take on Talixae herself, who has a ton of fire spells she casts, and an important one is the Burning Intensity buff. This is something she'll stack up on herself throughout this fight, with each stack increasing the ticking damage she deals every 3 seconds, as well as giving her a 10% fire damage buff in general, so this boss fight gets harder and harder as it goes on. On top of this, you'll want to keep constant kicks on the boss as she will cast Withering Soul fairly frequently, which is a stacking magic debuff that reduces both health and move speed of all players by 10% if it goes off. Definitely a bad thing to happen, especially with that ramping fire damage, so make sure this gets kicked. Aside from that, she'll occasionally cast Infernal Eruption. This spawns several swirlies underneath every single player that both leave behind a fire puddle and spawn an Infernal Imp. These imps are very similar to the Blazing Imp Trash. They're able to cast both that random target Firebolt and the Channel Drifting Embers. However, they have very low health comparatively, so they can be killed pretty quickly here. You just want to try and stay relatively stacked here, move as a group when the swirlies go out, and then this spawns the imps in a relatively small area, so you can quickly AoE them down and CC them, stuns, all those kind of things, and get them dead before they cast any spells. Once you've defeated Talixae, make sure you grab a costume from the nearby NPC here, then head into the estate and try and find the Demon Imposter in order to unlock the final boss. In order to do so, there are 5 chatty rumor mongers here that you can talk to in order to get a clue as to what the imposter looks like. Notably, once you've found all 5 clues, if you have a Demon Hunter or Protection Paladin in your group, they'll be able to identify who the imposter is quickly with either Spectral Sight or Truth Guard, and this can speed up the process a fair bit. After you've determined who the imposter is, you can follow them to the side room where they'll reveal their true self, a Dreadlord Garant the Vile. This guy has seen several changes as well since Legion, taking a lot of inspiration from the Season 4 affix Shrouded. So he has that Vampiric Claw ability on the tank. This is a shadow hit that will heal Garant based on the damage done, so make sure you mitigate this as much as you can to reduce that healing. He also will spawn Hypnosis Bats, which will just try and cast Hypnosis on a random player. You can't kick this, but you can use any form of CC on this bat to prevent that cast, and then it will just despawn after that. If this goes off though, it is a charm, so make sure you stop these bats. Finally, he maintains that Shadow Bolt volley from before. This is just a 100-yard range shadow hit on the entire party. Once you've defeated Garant, you'll be able to grab the keys from his body, which open up the balcony that Advisor Melandrus is on. This boss fight is simple but challenging, with a lot of the difficulty coming from managing your available space and positioning well. The main thing you'll need to be worried about here is Blade Surge, which causes the boss to dash to a random ranged player, dealing damage within 5 yards and bleeding any one hit, as well as leaving behind an image of himself there. Where you put these images is very important because they will duplicate both of his next 2 abilities, which can be extremely dangerous if you aren't careful and ramps up over the course of the fight as more images spawn. The first is Piercing Gale, which is a frontal line attack that deals a bunch of physical damage, and again, gets pretty hectic once you have like 5 or 6 of these images out and you have a bunch of lines going across the entire platform. Make sure you avoid these. There's also the AoE Slicing Maelstrom, which is an often misunderstood ability and will likely be the source of a lot of deaths on this boss. When cast, the boss deals a set amount of damage to all players no matter where you are, then it deals additional extra damage to anyone that is within 7 yards of the boss or any of his images. This means you'll want to stay away from all the images when this goes off, as well as the boss himself. This can hurt melee boss uptime, of course, but dead DPS deal no DPS whatsoever, so either pop a defensive here if you want to stay on the boss, or just back up away from the boss and stay safe if you can't. Notably, this will stack if you're in range of both the boss and an image, for example, so again, really make sure that no image is within 7 yards of you to reduce that damage intake. For how to handle image positioning here, we found that having your range stack up near the door that you came in from, and then moving whenever a blade surge targets one of them to be best. You can also min-max this positioning a bit more by having your range go back on top of the previously spawned images just before a blade surge cast. You can stack them up on the same spot. Just be careful here to avoid going on top of these spots during the Slicing Maelstroms. In addition to the previously mentioned abilities, Enveloping Winds will also spawn all over this platform throughout the fight, and these are just roaming tornadoes that will stun anyone who comes into contact with them for 4 seconds, so some area denial here on top of your aerial denial in case there wasn't enough of that already. That wraps up all of the abilities throughout the dungeon though, so let's talk a little bit about the pug-friendly route I've got here, which I'm walking you through in MDT. If you want the link to this route for yourself, I'll throw that down in the description below. Right off the bat here, there is this little Duskwatch guard. You can CC this mob with any of those out of combat CCs to just walk past them, so sap in prison, that kind of thing. Worst case though, if you don't have any of those, just pull this guy into the first pack, not a big deal. Here, just watch that frontal as you're running up. Notably that you have that big watchguard pillar thing here that you want to make sure you disable here. So kill them, disable that, move down the stairs. You've got a pack down here by the docks here. Then you move up. The reason for this is that they've actually kind of increased the aggro radius of these guardian constructs from Legion to now, it seems like. So it's very difficult to do the little jump skip here and avoid both of these. So I just go around now is what I'm recommending to pug groups. You pull these mana worms here. Just be careful of this guy's padding. He could be padding towards on top of these mana worms when that happens, so just be careful. Pull them on top of these guys, go down here if you need to because this area will be clear, and then you have this big blue pole, and you're probably thinking, Tactics, why the hell are you doing this giant blue pole here? You should be able to avoid half these mobs. Well, yes, in theory you should be, but like I mentioned, the aggro radius on these guys is increased. These guys are actually very close to the door, closer than they would appear in this picture here. And in general, in any pug group, this is the pull that's going to happen whenever you go into this corner. I just don't really think everyone is going to be able to avoid all these guys. Maybe they do, and maybe your pug group is insane, but I'm just going to assume that people accidentally butt pull all this stuff anyways, so just pull it so that you know exactly what is in the pull. Get ahead of that problem a little bit. Here, keep your interrupts on the Guardian Construct so he doesn't heal up everything else. Make sure the sentry doesn't get cast off on the watch post, and then just AoE it all down. Then move forward up the bridge. Notably, the Engineering Orb, Goblin, and Gnome as well spawns in the back of this building if it does spawn, so you can potentially grab that if it's up. Otherwise, moving up here, clearing this 3-pack, there are 3 watch posts in this boss room here, so you can have someone go disable them without actually aggroing any of the trash whatsoever. Easier on a stealth class, of course, but it doesn't require stealth. And then you can engage the boss. Don't forget alchemists or rogues. The flask is in the center of the room here for you to interact with and basically remove 25% health from the boss. Then you move up here. You've got 1 Guardian Construct that you can just run with throughout all these buildings here to actually come out over here in the demon area. Again, be careful of that frontal smash attack because it does kind of follow the tank a little bit in that sense. So just be careful. Don't be in front of this mob as you're running through this area. And then once you actually get to the demon area, I've just kind of like clicked on things tentatively because it's hard to say what exactly you're going to have to pull here. The big thing is the number of enforcers you pull. So I've selected 3 enforcers here, but you won't necessarily pull 3 enforcers, right? Because if you have, for example, any of those items that spawns one of the emissaries, that eliminates an enforcer that you need to pull. This leaves you with a couple options. If you know you have the ability to activate at least one of those things just because you have very good coverage, you can do things earlier like pull some extra trash down here or in this area here to account for that and know that you're going to pull less enforcers. That's a bit more of an advanced thing, so I've just taken into account that we're going to pull a bunch of stuff in this area, and there is some extra optional trash in this area as well for you to work with, so it's not the end of the world there. If you're like, I'm only going to pull 2 enforcers because we have the ability to open one of these extra items that summons an emissary, so you can pick up some of these extra shadow mistresses, inquisitors, and hounds in this area as well. Just note that this is going to vary as well because, of course, these Fellbound Enforcers don't have static spawn points. Their spawn points are random throughout the place. They can spawn in any of these 4 locations here throughout the entire area here, so just be aware of that as well. This order is extremely tentative. The mobs you're killing in this area are tentative as well. And also note that you can pull more things together in this area if you're feeling like that's something your group is capable of, like enforcers with a trash pack or a trash pack with one of the emissaries, because they of course do not get buffed by that emissary buff. So note that these pulls are very, very tentative in this area, so you may need to adjust depending on your group's skill level. That just brings you to the second boss Talixae here, and then you go through, do your whole little event thing to spawn Garanth, and then open the keys to the final boss. There it is, guys, though, my final Season 1 Mythic Plus guide for Dragonflight. If you want to check out any of those other guides, they're over on my channel and linked in the description below. Also a reminder, I've got a ton of great content coming, including advanced routing guides and high key walkthroughs from a tank's perspective. So if that interests you, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss when those get posted. If you have any questions regarding this dungeon or even just tanking in general, feel free to drop those down in the comments below or come stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics and ask me there. I'll be streaming a ton of Mythic Plus and raiding on my tanks once the season starts, so come stop by and say hi. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.